Associate Professor of Wine Business at Adelaide Business School here in the University of Adelaide. In this webinar, Armando will provide us with an overview of the current status of the labelling regulations, followed by some insights from a cross-country study conducted in Australia, Italy and Germany. We've allowed plenty of times for the questions you may have to be answered at the end of the webinar. However, feel free to send them through to me as they come to mind. You can do this via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. As usual, this webinar will be recorded and a link to the recording will be sent to you all should you wish to watch the content again at a later time. It is now my pleasure to hand over to you, Armando, for today's presentation.
Hi, Prue. Thank you very much and welcome everyone. I'm gonna share my presentation, so hopefully you should be able to see it all right. Prue, let me know if the slides don't come through the way in which they are. So as I was saying, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thanks to Wine Communicators of Australia for inviting me to deliver this webinar about the impact of nutritional information and ingredients listing that they may have on consumers' choices. Before just drilling down into the content of today's webinar, I just would like to spend just a couple of minutes to tell you about who we are and what we do. So I have had the honor and still have the honor and the pleasure to lead the wine business group here at the Adelaide Business School, which is part of the University of Adelaide. And since the team was formed, we have really agreed that our mission should be about supporting the sustainable growth of the domestic and international wine industry. And the way in which we want to do this is by in some ways doing what we believe should be the role of modern academia. A modern academia that first of all should focus into generating and producing new insights for the benefit of, in our case, the wine sector. So our job is not just about delivering what other people have found, what other companies, discoveries that have been found, but also being the generator of new knowledge. New knowledge that needs to end up in some of the highest possible academic outlets in order to validate the results of our research, but also to be disseminated through industry publications and other forms of communication so that they can really be adopted by the industry in their day-to-day activities. But together and in parallel with the idea of generating new research, we want to make sure that we can provide our students the state-of-the-art knowledge at the time of the enrollment that we know about any aspect of wine business. The third aspect is around, of course, engaging with the industry, making sure that we are there to listen about what are the industry needs and try to help them solve the day-to-day problems that they might have. And we want to do all of this by creating the best team culture that we can create, a culture based on inclusion, accountability, problem-solving orientation, and emotional intelligence. We are collaborating with a series of partners, both domestically and internationally. As you might see also from me delivering this presentation with Wine Communicators of Australia, the University of Adelaide is a gold sponsor of Wine Communicators of Australia. And one of the, I guess, activities that we are the proudest of is the Wine Industry Mentor Program, which this year has expanded from just being about wine business and marketing into other aspects of the wine sector, such as viticulture and enology. And because of that, we've also had the opportunity to have on board the Australian Society of Viticulture and Enology and Wine Australia, together with our colleagues at the School of Agriculture, Food and Wine. We are also part of the Great Wine Capitals Global Network, as representative in the steering committee for the City of Adelaide. Very proud of a MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, that we recently signed with Barossa Grape and Wine. But as I said, we're not just about the industry, but also about the academic component. So we are part of the two major organizations, academic organizations, when it comes to wine business, the Academy of Wine Business Research and the American Association of Wine Economists. Okay, so let's start with the content of today's presentation, which I thought to structure in three key parts. First of all, I would like to provide you with an overview on the changes in regulations for nutritional information and ingredients listing in the European Union and a benchmark with the Australian regulations. I know that obviously also other countries will have their own regulations, but I wanted to particularly focus on the EU rules as they're going to have the most extensive list of mandatory information when it comes to nutritional information and ingredients listing that we will have. Secondly, I would like to tell you a little bit more about a study that I conducted with some colleagues of mine in Germany and Italy to test the impact of nutritional information and ingredients listing on wine consumer choices. And lastly, we will have, as Prue said, hopefully plenty of time for your questions and my answers. So where do we start? I think it's important that we clearly define the perimeter of this presentation, because when we talk about the topic of labeling, nutritional information and ingredients, there are a few factors interacting in this space. First of all, we've seen probably in the last 18 to 24 months a growing, if you like, marketing consumer trends for what I guess we can summarize with the word transparency, which probably has risen to the attention of many of us with the marketing campaign of Cameron Diaz Evelyn Wines. And in one of the first press releases, I took the quotes of one of the first quotes that she wrote about, that she mentioned about wines, and she said, "Look, I've been enjoying wine for many years and never questioned about what wines are made of," because she figured out that it was the most responsible choice of alcohol and was just made with fermented grapes, but no idea of the process. And in my mind, and I think in the minds of many commentators, this whole sort of marketing communication campaign sort of started with and generated almost an equation of, if you provide information and ingredients in the wine, then a wine is clean, which in many ways I think is just a wrong message that we can pass to consumers all over the world. At the same time, we know that the global wine industry is feeling the push from organizations like the WHO. As you can see here as well, Europe has a new plan launched in March 2021 called the Europe's Beating Cancer Plan to cut the harmful consumption of alcohol. And part of this push will include listing nutritional information and ingredients, as we will focus specifically on the presentations, but the EU is also starting a new health warning system to appear on wine label, but this is probably something that in theory we should be seeing by 2023. We've seen also some health warning appearing already in some other countries. The US, as you might know, has a written warning label. We know what's been happening with our labels here in Australia with pregnancy label and health warnings. So as you can see, there are different plans in which we can discuss the whole topic around health and labeling and transparency. So I just want to clarify that what I'm going to talk about here specifically is about nutritional and ingredients listing, not around health warning, or if you like, more the marketing side of how we can communicate transparency to channel partners or to consumers. The other aspect that I would like to clarify so that we have a few definitions in place is just a four definitions that probably you are already aware of, but just in case I will briefly to remind all of us, and probably myself first, what is the definition of an additive? which is any substance that is not normally consumed as a food in itself and is not normally used as an ingredient of food, but which is intentionally added to a food in order to achieve a technological function. So for example, ascorbic acid, carbon dioxide, citric acid, etc., etc. Additives are a different thing compared to then processing aids, which on the other side are substances that are used in processing of raw materials, food or ingredients to fulfill a technological purpose relating to the treatment or processing, but does not perform a technological function in the final food. So for example, elements, typical processing aids could be agar, bentonite, dimethyl carbonate, etc., etc. The other couple of definitions that I want to make sure that we have in place is energy value, which is effectively the number of kilojoules or calories that a food product or a beverage, whether it's alcoholic or not, contain, and nutritional information, which is the more detailed list of all the nutrients that can be part of a food or a beverage, whether alcoholic or not. So things like fat, cholesterol, carbohydrates, protein, etc., etc. And we know that with nutritional information, we can express the value by per serving and per portion. So now that hopefully we have clarified and defined the perimeter of this presentation, let's start by looking specifically at what are the latest regulations for labeling wine, first of all in Australia and then the European Union. Probably I'm not showing something that you are not already very familiar with. I took this slide from the Wine Australia domestic labelling rules, which are showing currently what is the current level of regulations for things that need to be included in a mandatory way on a wine label. Of course, things like brand name, country of origin, the name of food, alcohol content. Recently, and this is going to be mandatory from the 31st of July 2023, we need to have a pregnancy label warning displayed on the label. And of course, on the other side, geographical indications, variety, vintage, but also the indication of standard drinks, mandatory informations about allergens, and obviously, finally, the name and address of the vendor, the manufacturers, the packers, or the importers. Now, when I contacted Wine Australia, in particular, a couple of months ago, as I started to put together this presentation, I've been told that when it comes to nutritional information and ingredients listing, that do not seem to be imminent changes for the domestic markets about the introduction of a mandatory system of information for nutritional labels or ingredients listing. So when it comes to our domestic market, it seems that what we are seeing right now is probably something that is going to stay as it is for possibly at least the next few months. Different story when we start looking at what's been happening at the European Union level, which has recently approved a change in the mandatory information for nutritional label and ingredients listing. But this is a journey that in many ways has started in 2011 with the EU regulation 1169 in 2011, which exempted alcoholic beverages containing more than 1.2% by volume of alcohol from the obligation of making a nutritional declaration and a mandatory list of ingredients on wine labels. The only requirements that up until recently existed was to list the 14 most common allergens, such as sulfites, eggs, and milk products that, as I said, had to be declared. But in 2017, the European Commission adopted a report which concluded that there was no objective grounds that would justify the absence of an information on ingredients and nutritional information on alcoholic beverages. And so, as a result of that report by the European Commission, the European Association representing the alcoholic beverage sector, such as the Comité Européen des Entreprises de Vin, the European Confederation of Independent Wine Growers, Brewers of Europe, etc., presented a self-regulatory proposal, which is made of 6 key principles, which I'm gonna enunciate in the next couple of slides. First of all, the first principle is around the fact that the European alcoholic beverage sector, so not just wine, but also beer and spirits, are committed to providing that nutritional information and the list of ingredients on their products in a tailored and meaningful way. The interesting thing, I guess, and this is around principle number 2, is that this nutritional information and list of ingredients will be provided to consumers, or could be provided to consumers in a variety of different ways. This information can be part of the label, so the printed label, but there could be the possibility of providing this information as a web link, as a QR code, of other means of sort of using smart technologies. And so that potentially is going to have some implication in terms of how we can design labels for the European market. And as I said, this is also linked with the third principles about the use of innovative tools and the development of a comprehensive system to provide this information to consumers. Principle number 4, which I found also to be quite interesting, probably a necessary specification to say that food business operators are responsible for the information that they decide to display for consumers. And the reason why this element had to be specified was because there was some sort of a discussion, which in the end didn't go anywhere, about the idea of potentially having, let's say, a website like Divino that could contain all the information around, for example, nutritional information and ingredients listing. But obviously, this is not possible because every producer is legally responsible to provide the necessary information to consumers. It couldn't be demanded to sort of a third party when it comes to the information, to the provision of this information. The information and the set of principles that are laid out in this self-regulatory proposal are also going to be added, and will have another component in an annex. And there have been several annexes that have been produced, one for each sector. And I'm going to specifically tell you a little bit more about the wine and aromatized wine product annex that came together with a self-regulatory proposal. And so these 6 principles that were published in March 2018, then had a 3-year period implementation in order to be fully operative. However, as you can see, there are a few things that are still in progress. So as I was saying, in addition to these 6 principles, this European Association presented various annexes which contain a few additional information around the elements that had to be added to the ingredients listing and on potentially to a label. First of all, they specify again the fact that the information around nutritional information and ingredients listing could be presented either on labels, but also using QR codes and web links. The second important point is that irrespective of the options that producers, operators are going to decide to use when communicating about nutrition and ingredients, the list of substances or products that could cause allergies, so effectively allergens, necessarily must be mentioned on the label. The CEV also is planning to develop an harmonized, comprehensive information ecosystem that operators can access to make sure that they can develop the most, the right, I should say, not the most, but the right set of information around nutrition and ingredients. And the original proposal that was done in March 2018 was that it should have come into place in March 2021, so a few months ago. However, I've been listening to a few other webinars in preparation of this webinar, as well as I went to check the website of CEV, and if you go there, you can see that the website is still in progress. So they haven't come up with this comprehensive ecosystem just yet. Another important point was that when it comes to the nutritional information, the key point is that nutritional information can be limited to the energy value, hence the reason why hopefully I clarified the meaning of energy value differently from nutritional information. But if an operator wants, they could add a more detailed list of nutritional information. So again, for example, carbohydrates, sugar, fat, etc. The energy value can be calculated, and I'll show you later on the formula that appears on the wine and aromatized wine product annex in order to calculate the energy value. But at the same time, the annex provides a sort of summary of the most typical level of energy that appears for different type of wine products, of wine style. So the idea here is that one could use that framework in order to come up with the right information to communicate to consumers, to the public, when it comes to the energy value of the product. Another point that I thought to stress, and hence why I've highlighted it in red, that there is no need for retrospective labels of wines that are already in the market. So to be clear here, obviously, if you have already a wine that has been sold, that is already out in the market, that label does not need to be retrofitted with the information that will become mandatory by the end of 2022. However, if you have a wine that still needs to be released, then the information need to appear, as I said, by the end of 2022. Processing aids and winemaking processes don't need to appear on a label, and the full list of ingredients and processing aids are clearly defined in the Codex Alimentarius. So in many ways, if you have any doubt, you can check that link, which you can see now on this slide, to effectively see what needs to be added and doesn't need to be added. Another important point is that the rules that I've been talking up until now obviously apply to the European Union. So wines that are sold in the UK will be exempted from the labeling requirements. However, as I was listening to another webinar that was delivered a few months ago, Monica Christman, the former president of the IV, made a comment around the fact that now both Australia and now also the UK are part of the OIV, and therefore probably what we are going to see at the European Union level might also, by extension, at some point become compulsory also for wine sold in the UK. And one last final point, which maybe doesn't apply to all of you, but maybe does apply to some of you, is that if you want to make an aromatized wine product using wine as an ingredient, you only need to indicate the use of wine, not the ingredients necessary to make that wine. So just moving forward, as I said, if you look at the annex that was published in 2018, it shows a formula, I think it was on page 5, showing exactly how you can calculate the energy value of the wine. So I'm not going to very much into the details of this, but what I wanted to show you was that there is also a table which provides sort of a accepted data for energy content that can be communicated to the public depending on the type of wine that you are dealing with. So whether it's a still wine, whether it's a sparkling wine with different level of residual sugar, whether you have an aromatized wine product, whether you have a liqueur wine. You can see here the volume of reference as well as the energy content expressed in kilojoule as well as in kilocalories. So in many ways, I've provided with you up until now with hopefully the latest regulations that we've seen so far that are going to apply for at the European Union level, but effectively there are some pieces of information that are still missing, that are still out of the equation of knowledge. The first of all is the fact that we still have very little understanding really about the extent to which producers and consumers care about nutritional and ingredients listing when it comes to wine. There have been studies, particularly in the food area, that have sort of digged a little bit more into this area. And there was a study commissioned by the European Commission, not the European Union, but the European Commission approximately 5-6 years ago. It was a study done with over 5,000 consumers in 6 member states, showing that the majority of respondents overestimated the number of calories in beer and wine, but underestimated the amount of calories in whiskey, for example. And whilst the main ingredients to produce beer were fairly known, the ingredients to produce wines were not. So we saw that there was some research, but again, we believe not enough to sort of justify in many ways the implementation of new mandatory rules. The other elements that maybe here I'm going a tad too technical, but I would like you to reflect on a concept that possibly you might end up sort of dealing in your day-to-day activities if you have it with a market research agency, is that there are 2 main ways in which you can gather information from consumers when you want to ask them about attitudes, for example, label preferences or recall behavior. One is what we call a direct approach, which effectively is when you ask people to say, rate something on a scale on 1 to 5, 1 to 7, how much you dislike or like something. The other is the method that I'm going to show you in a second, which is called the discrete choice experiment, where you don't ask people to rate the object of what you want to study, but you simply ask people to choose an element. We believe that this second method is much more accurate method of gathering information and understanding what people, how much really people think and evaluate an object, because this is really how our brain works. We don't, as a child, you don't say that you dislike broccoli 2 or you like broccoli 7. You either eat them or spit them out. And in the same way, this is how we choose. We don't sort of stay in front of a shelf judging wine from, every single wine from a scale of 1 to 7, but we are in front of a shelf, we look at different wines, and we decide the wine that we like the most. And lastly, there have been also a few more studies using a methodology that you might have heard called eye tracking, which effectively looks at the amount of attention that people dedicate to different parts of the label. But again, that does not give you a ranking, sort of an order of importance of where the different parts of the label really matter for consumers. And so for that reason, we decided to conduct a study, as I said, with a couple of colleagues from Geisenheim University, the University of Naples, and a couple of universities in Naples. So I'm just going to have a sip of water. I'm going to ask Prue if there are any questions. Otherwise, I will keep on with my presentation. Okay, beautiful. So what have we done? So this is my list of colleagues: Evelyn Pabst and Simone Luse from Geisenheim University, and Riccardo Vecchio and Azzurra Annunziata from Parthenope University in Naples and University of Naples Federico II. This was also, just want to say that this was a study that was also partially funded by the OIV. So what were the key hypotheses that we wanted to test in this study? First of all, the first two hypotheses were really about just understanding whether nutritional information and ingredients listing had any impact at all when it comes to the choice of a wine. The two set of hypotheses were due to the fact that we split the sample into three subgroups. To one group, we simply asked them to choose different wines without any prior information before choosing the wine. And the other two groups received a specific message, one which was more on the positive side about the positive role of ingredients in wine production, and one around the negative, the possible negative consequences of using ingredients in wine production. And therefore, what we wanted to test was the impact that the provision of this information has on the way in which people choose wine and evaluate different elements on a wine label. And lastly, again, playing on this additional information that we did provide to some consumers and not others, we wanted to test whether providing a negative information would increase the if you like, the percentage of people that would say, I will not buy any wine, and whether a provision of a negative information will increase the labels that contain no ingredients at all. As I said, we did these studies in 3 countries. We did that in 2019, Australia, Germany, and Italy. We had a representative sample of the wine drinking population in each of these 3 countries, approximately 700 people, split into 3 groups. So we had approximately 250 consumers in what we call the reference group, which did not receive any information, another around 250 in the group that received a positive message, and 250 in the group that received a negative message. So what have we done in terms of methodology? As I was saying, we used the methodology called discrete choice experiment. And this methodology effectively allows you to combine different product features into, in our case, a back label, but it could be also a front label. And this is effectively what you present to your respondents. I'm going to show you an example of what we call a choice set. So this combination of alternatives made of different product characteristics. This is what you present to consumers. In our case, and in the case of Australia, we use the combinatory design to combine different grape varieties, such as Cabernet Sauvignon, Shiraz, and Barbera, different regions of origin, Barossa, Langon Creek, and Coonawarra, different price points, different amount of additional sensory information, nutritional information, and ingredients. Obviously, I'm providing you now here with the example for Australia. For example, in the case of Germany, the grape varieties were substituted with Müller-Thurgau, Grauburgunder, and Riesling. We had different regions like Nahe, the Franken, and the Mosel, different price points, obviously in euros, but also relative to the market characteristics of Germany. And again, different sensory information. And again, in Italy was again different. So this is an example of the choice set, of one of the many choice sets that every respondent had to choose. You can see here, these are effectively back labels. At the top, you can see the region of origin and the grape variety. Then there could be different levels of information, either no information at all about the sensory characteristics of the wine. There could be just some elements of sensory characteristics. It could be sensory plus food matching, Also, as you can see more in the center of the slide, we had different amount of nutritional of information around nutritional component, either none, a long sort of a more extensive nutritional value list, or simply an indication of the nutritional value. We have an information about different price points, and finally at the bottom a sort of a longer ingredients list, just an information around the allergens, or a shorter ingredients list, and then the usual information about the fact that it's a wine of Australia, the lot, the volume content, the alcohol content, the barcode. As I was saying before, we split the sample in 3 parts. So some consumers, approximately 1/3 of the sample, just went straight into answering the questions and choosing the wines based on those choice set that I just showed you. In the other case, we had a positive information about wines, about the benefits of using different ingredients in wine, the one that you can see on the right side of your screen, and another one that sort of talks more negatively about the use of ingredients. So the fact that, you know, we could potentially, the wine is an industry that use chemical additives. So we tested obviously those elements and those advertising and those articles to make sure that effectively people felt that they were either communicating a positive message about ingredients or a negative message about ingredients. And then after showing those ads, we ask respondents to effectively select a wine based on the most common situation in which they would consume a wine. So imagine that you're choosing a wine for a normal occasion at home, you're evaluating different wines. We show you now 12 choice scenario. For each choice scenario, select the wine that you will be most likely to choose. Okay, so let's go now into the results, starting obviously with Australia. So as you can see here, in the reference condition, the 2 key elements, probably the key elements in Australia driving the choice was the sensory information about the wine. So sensory description plus potentially food matching suggestion, followed by price at 9% of importance and variety at 17%. However, in the moment in which we communicate either a positive or a negative information about the use of ingredients, we see some changes. Maybe, hopefully, you can see my mouse as it moves around. You can see that the importance of nutritional information jumps from 11% to 17%. But I think the most interesting part in relation to Australia is that when we communicate negative information about the use of ingredients, the importance of ingredients immediately skyrockets and increases in importance, whilst on the other side, the importance for sensory information decreases. It goes from approximately 53–55% down to 37%. In Germany, we have somehow a similar situation. Again, sensory information and price are the 2 key factors when we don't prompt people with any message about the ingredients, positive or negative information about the ingredients. But as you can see, particularly when it comes to the importance of ingredients, we see that whether it's a positive and particularly with a negative information about ingredients, the importance of ingredients really skyrockets. And it becomes, with the negative information, the most important factor that German consumers put attention on when choosing a wine. In Italy, it was probably a slightly different situation, because for Italians, the most important factor was the region of origin, followed by nutritional information at 27% and sensory information at 26% in the reference condition. The positive message doesn't change the situation very much, but again, similar to German consumers, when consumers were prompted with a negative message about the use of ingredients, immediately the importance of ingredients skyrocketed. So, summarize the results. What we found was that the impact of nutritional information always have a significant impact, regardless of the message that we pass on to consumers, but the presence of ingredients information has an impact on consumers' wine choices only in Italy. If people are prompted with either a positive or a negative message, there is a growth in importance of particularly ingredients information, but also nutritional information. And as you can see in the hypothesis 4A, the negative information about the use of ingredients increases the utility, so the propensity of people to say, I would not buy any of these wines, only in Germany and Italy, but not in Australia. So what conclusions can we derive from this study? Is that surely nutritional ingredients information will have a significant effect on the wine industry, on the way in which are we going to communicate about our wines, and it's going to have a strong influence, particularly if we're going to see a lot of negative media coverage about the use of ingredients, listing in wine. So not only we have to, I guess, regulate the way in which wines are labeled from a mandatory point of view, but also we need to make sure that the communication that we can provide about our wines doesn't go down really that negative pathway. I think it's going to be very interesting to test the effect of communicating nutritional information and ingredients via QR code, because in many ways from previous studies, we've seen that not many consumers are generally sort of interested in spending time in looking at QR codes. This is generally something that we see more with more wine-involved consumers. The other critical point is that, again, everything that adds to wine labels is going to generate somehow a fight in terms of label real estate. So in many ways, probably the use of QR codes is going to take some pressure off. But at the same time, if together with nutritional information, as it is already happening in Australia, we need to indicate about health warnings, it's going to make our wine labels more and more crowded. There is another aspect that I think, as I said, I didn't mention, and it wasn't because it wasn't the purpose of today's webinar, otherwise it would have been even longer than what it currently has been. It's about the impact of health warnings, pregnancy label on wine choices. Hopefully this is something that even in my group we can test quite soon. And what we are actually at the moment spending quite a bit of time is how can the impact of and the introduction and the growth of NOLO, so low and no alcohol wines, and also low and no alcohol beverages can potentially shift the results that we have presented up until now. I guess really the main conclusion is that I found is that we can't stick our hands in the sand and pretend that these problems don't exist, but we need to be ready. We need to understand what are the rules and regulations and how can we be ahead of the game rather than just always trying to adapt to rules that are already out there. Look, I hope you found this presentation useful. I wanted to sort of also provide some additional references if you are interested in this space. There was, I think, an excellent webinar done by a market research agency called Areni Global earlier this year about rules and regulations for wine labeling in Europe. Recently, I think it was probably about a month ago, the AWRI published a interesting technical review about the impact that different type of ingredients can have in changing the energy content of wines. there was a very good brief produced by, don't remember her name, I think it was probably Tina, but I don't remember correctly, Laninen, about alcohol labeling rules in Europe. A couple of other projects and publications done by my colleagues that somehow look more into the importance of, again, ingredients and nutritional information from a producer side. And finally, I would say always make sure that you take a look at the Wine Australia export market guides, depending on the market in which you are thinking about exporting, because that can be a very useful source of information to make sure that you're doing the right thing. So with that, I would like to thank you for your attention. We're going to open the floor now for the Q&A session, but if you have any information, feel free to contact me on my email address, and you can also find my office number here. So again, thank you very much, and I look forward to any questions that you might have.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Armando. A lot of really fantastic information that I dare say everyone's just digesting. And a really good point you raised at the end about, Australian producers being proactive and really ahead of the time when it comes to consumer exporting and labelling in those countries. So thank you so much. We do have a question that has come in. Given the variations across the world, what do you think are the most likely changes that we'll see in Australia over the next few years? What's your prediction?
Look, I think, given probably the importance in many ways of the European market, probably what we are going to the regulatory framework that we see in Europe, if you have to already label a wine with those information for the European market, probably it might make, because it could still be a voluntary information. It's not that you cannot include the information, if you're selling wine in Australia about energy content or nutritional information. So probably I believe we might gonna end up adapting to the strictest level of mandatory information just to, again, make sure that we don't need to relabel everything, the wine, depending on where we're going. So, and probably this was my interpretation as well of that comment that I was mentioning before about Monica Christman, the previous president of the OIV. The fact that Australia is part of the OIV, UK is also going to be is now part as well of the OIV. Probably we're going to see that same level of regulation there as well.
Yep, absolutely. I don't know if anyone else has any questions for Armando. That's the only one that's come through to date. Thank you, Armando, for providing your contact details, because I dare say that some people might like to take their questions offline. But sure. Thank you so much for your time today. As I said earlier, this session is recorded and everybody will be sent the recording so you can look back and digest everything that Armando has said.
Perfect.
Wonderful. So just to remind everyone, WCA still has a couple of webinars for the rest of the year. So the next one's coming up on Tuesday, the 12th of October. We're just finalising details on the presenter for that one. So please stay tuned on your inbox and on the WCA website for further details. For all WCA members, our recordings from previous webinars, which you get complimentary access to, are held on the website in the members section. So feel free to have a look through the library, as there's some fantastic resources in there. If you have any suggestions on webinar topics you would like us to cover in probably next year's program now, please email me at wca@winecommunicators.com.au. Thanks again for joining us today. Thank you, Armando. Take care and stay safe wherever you are in Australia. Thank you.
Absolutely. Bye.